Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Welcome to the Visiting Speaker Series. My name is Tamara Pesic. I'm so pleased you are all able to join us today. Our guest is Todd Oppenheimer, author of The Flickering Mind, The False Promise of Technology in the Classroom and How Learning Can Be Saved. I'm so pleased that Todd was able to join us up here at Microsoft. We've been working on his visit for a number of months. Todd was a mime with Robin Williams. He is currently a sleep-deprived father. He's an amazing journalist and has just done some really fascinating research in this area of education and how computers can either help or hinder it. I'm so pleased that you were able to join us. Please help me welcome Todd Oppenheimer.
Oh, that's right. I'm not used to all this technology. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming to hear a potential enemy in the lion's den or something, or however you would put it. Despite the aggressive tone of my book, I did come up with some findings in all of my study of schools, and I've sort of been visiting and studying schools for about, I guess, 6-8 years now. Some things that I think are promising. I'll read some sections. Many of the sections that I will read are some of the more negative portraits of sort of things to be careful of. And I just met with about 6 or 8 of your people, and we had a good discussion about all kinds of pros and cons and good possibilities and bad possibilities. So we can get into those if you want. Let me do this. I'll just give you a brief summary of what the book is and what sort of my overriding concern is now that we're 6+ months after the book's been out, and then read you some sections to give you a taste of what I found. The main, as the subtitle of the book suggests, my main concern is that technology, while having its pluses and certainly having its potential, unfortunately, when it gets into the reality of the education culture, which is very different than the reality of your all's vision and imagination as it exists in your smart brains and in your controlled offices. The reality when it gets into the classroom culture becomes a whole other beast. When you deal with, the education, like many large institutions like, healthcare or the military or any of these, is unfortunately a culture built for the average teacher, the average student, and this is something that innovators, whether it be trying to sell technology or trying to sell some new reading approach or new math or whatever has been sold to the schools over the years, this is something that the innovators continually fail to appreciate. Their ideals are so high and so intense, and then they always get bastardized and corrupted when you get into the classroom and see what distracted students, cut-up students, poorly paid teachers, overwhelmed teachers, exhausted teachers, what they do to these high visions. And the effect, as far as technology is concerned, is in some ways, I think, more serious than some of the other failed innovations of the past. Number one, because it costs so much. And as we know, schools are not an institution that have a lot of money. So when you drain hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars from a school district that can't afford it for an innovation that fails, an innovation that needs to be upgraded, if not completely changed 5 years from now, that is a high crime indeed. And then when you create a new scheme for how a class should function and how achievement gets measured, how students should do their work, with a kind of innovation that actually dumbs down the experience and flattens the experience, this starts to corrode what educators call the habits of mind. What they are all about is, as students go through school, by the time they get to high school and so on, they have built these habits of mind of how you gather knowledge, acquire mastery, refine your passions. And that is a very tricky enterprise. And if you introduce things that complicate and corrupt and distract that process, you really endanger it. So let me read a little bit, tell you what give you some hard examples of what I'm talking about. I'll start with a bit of the introduction, then we'll skip around. In the fall of 1998, just days after the midterm elections for the United States Congress, a group of 10th graders from Blair High School in Montgomery County, Maryland, made the pages of the Washington Post with an unusual school project. As part of their government studies class, they had accepted an assignment from the Post to make predictions on the year's congressional and gubernatorial races and match their choices against those of the pros. 5 days before the election, the students decided to run counter to the prevailing political wisdom at the time, predicting that the Republicans would not gain seats in the House of Representatives. Not only were the students correct, but they also outguessed all 13 of the professional pundits and political commentators to whom the Post had given the same assignment. Quote, "I admit it, I was beaten by a bunch of 10th graders at something I get paid to do for a living," Laura Ingraham, a political commentator for MSNBC, wrote in the mea culpa for the Post's Sunday opinion section. The students apparently won the day because, with the aid of computers, they had done their homework with a kind of thoroughness that the pundits had neglected. They began with quick guesses on nearly 400 races, which had been selected by their teacher as relatively easy calls. Then, with the 70 hotly contested races that remained, they embarked on weeks of serious research. They had a few standard print materials at their disposal, political almanacs and statistical abstract, among other literature, but they spent most of their time trawling the highways and alleyways of the internet. Their teacher, a librarian at Blair High School, recalls they became little mini demographers. By the end of October, the class had burrowed into each district's economic history, looking for troubles such as factory closings or military base shutdowns. They studied race, gender, and economic and income profiles, past voting patterns, the candidates' campaign war chests, and signs of political blunders or public opinion shifts as reflected in local newspaper coverage. Then they called it right on the button. Ingraham went on to wonder, how could so many of us who follow politics not have heard the Democratic freight train rounding the political bend? Probably because we were talking to politicians and to each other instead of listening to voters. A year later, I watched a group of 11th graders. Now, this previous anecdote I just read you was 10th graders. I watched a group of 11th graders in Worcester, Massachusetts, engage in quite a different civics project at Worcester's Accelerated Learning Laboratory, called the ALL School, A-L-L. This school is the flagship institution of the Connect program, the only one of the big national school reform initiatives to organize itself around modern technology. On this particular fall day, the 11th grade social studies class was working on reports about the powers of Congress, constructed as PowerPoint presentations, named after some little company's business project. You may have heard of it, I don't know, probably not. The projects were nearly finished, and the teacher was feeling pleased with the results. When I asked to see one, she steered me to a young man whose report she felt was in particularly good shape. Sure enough, as the student clicked through the presentation, I was immediately struck by the clean graphics and the digestible writing. Then, suddenly, he was done. This was the extent of his report. But his content was no deeper nor more complex than what one commonly sees in civics papers done elsewhere with pencil and paper by 7th and 8th graders. Mystified, I asked the teacher how he'd used, I asked the student how he had used his time. He estimated that he'd spent approximately 17 hours on the project, only 7 of which had been devoted to research and writing. The rest went to refining the presentation's graphics. Surely, I thought, this cannot be a fair representation of what is going on at this school. Not only was all schools supported by the Connect organization, but Connect was in turn supported and funded by the New American Schools Development Corporation, the huge $130 million school reform consortium formed by a collection of corporate leaders. all of which had brought the all-school advantages that most others only dream about, not the least of which were small classes. This social studies class, for example, had no more than 6 or 7 students. Since small classes are generally synonymous with generous teacher attention and by extension good academic work, I took a seat in the social studies class to watch some more. The students proceeded with their computer work for a while. Then, toward the end, the teacher took a moment to review their knowledge of the subject they had spent so much of the term studying. When she asked them a few elementary questions about the purpose and powers of Congress, there was an uncomfortable silence. Half the class didn't know the answers. Later, as diplomatically as I could, I asked the teacher if she ever worried that the computer's multimedia appeal is distracting the students from studying the subject matter at hand. "Oh, not at all," she said. "I use technology as a tool. This is their first PowerPoint presentation. Next time, we'll incorporate video, so it's like a building block." Wait a minute. If the thin academic experience in this class is now considered by a model schools teacher to be an educational building block, we have entered a whole new world. We have arrived at a time where our entire sense of what it means to become an educated person has been turned on its head. Fortunately, remnants of education's sturdier traditions, practices that constitute real building blocks, are still available, as readers of this book will discover. These traditions are now scattered through a random assortment of schools across the United States and other countries like archaeological artifacts. With occasional modification, their examples offer great hope for American education. In fact, a collage of these practices could open up a whole new direction in education policy, a turn to what might be called enlightened basics. Anyway, I go on to make note that the contrast between these two schools, in my mind, is like a crisis as in the true sense of what, well, in one definition of what crisis means. In the Chinese language, crisis is a combination of two symbols. One symbol is danger and the other is opportunity. And technology presents both of those things, great danger and great opportunity. One reason I read that anecdote is because of the PowerPoint use, which I hope maybe we can all talk about. I'm curious to hear what you all think of that. I want to skip next to another anecdote that may be of interest here. It's about a high school in Napa, California, called New Technology High School. It was started in 1996. Very much dedicated to technology and is among a family of high schools being largely supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. During a workshop for educators that New Tech regularly holds, I listened to Mark Morrison, the principal, explain, this is a workshop on what's called project-based learning. Some of you may know what that is. Explain that at New Tech, quote, "We organize our curriculum around what it would be like to work in high tech at Silicon Graphics or at Microsoft. In press accounts, school administrators frequently point out that one of their main goals is to produce graduates who are industry ready. The futuristic vibrations in statements like these are strong, and undoubtedly they have drawn many of the school's administrators who come to Napa looking for answers. What then does such a curriculum look like, and what does it say about other schools' prospects for aggressive scholastic reform? The New Tech curriculum is a curious assortment. There are some catchy 21st century offerings, such as computer applications / communication technologies 1 and 2. There's multimedia design and criticism 1 and 2. There are highly technical classes in computer networking through one of Cisco Systems' ubiquitous networking academies, and new in 2002, an Oracle Academy sponsored by Oracle. There are also some basics, integrated math 2 and 3, and physics, and the social studies 2 more hybrids, political studies and American studies. While this may sound like an industry-ready program, Napa's 2 other public high schools, both of which are big, stodgy exemplars of education at its most traditional, offer a course lineup that many might regard as much more suited to 21st century professional success. In the technology arena, for example, the course offerings at New Tech's competitors include laboratory studies in applied physics, beginning in advanced electronics, engineering and technical drafting, computer maintenance and repair, and several courses in telecommunications. They also offer myriad courses in areas in which technology is commonly applied, subjects such as biology, environmental science, aviation, automotive mechanics, and video and television production. This is an addition, of course, to a rich variety of courses that New Tech doesn't even offer, including such basics as fine arts and the performing arts, sports, and 40 different classes in various foreign languages. A good number of these are advanced placement courses, which New Tech does not offer, and many educators, including the Department of Education, promote as vital preparation for college. Perhaps the most telling comparison between a program like New Tech's and the version found at clunky old institutional high schools is in their math classes. Until recently, the most advanced math course at New Tech covered only algebra and pre-calculus. In 2000, the school finally added a course in calculus. Let's see, I'm going to skip through this. Basically, they only go up through algebra 2, and just recently it started to calculus, and that's it. They don't go beyond that to statistics or anything. The paucity of New Tech's math program points to yet another irony in the school's high-tech value system, and this one is rather cruel. Anyone involved in the guts of today's technology age knows that having a rich background in mathematics and a vivid grounding in physical science and engineering principles is essential in this field. This kind of background is critical for work in high-level computer programming. I assume you would all tell me more about that than I know. An option that New Tech high students are supposed to be prepared for most of all. But when a school concentrates instead on teaching students how to handle today's computer programs, it is not simply missing the boat, it is pointing students to the wrong port. As Marjorie Bynum, Vice President of Workforce Development for an association called the Information Technology Association of America, this is the main association of all sorts of jobs in technology, not only in high-tech firms, but in basic firms. She said, by the time they get into the workforce, the computer programs they learned in school are totally obsolete. Despite the novelty of New Tech's computing emphasis, the school is repeating a very old pattern. Judah Schwartz, the former co-director of the Harvard Center for Educational Technology and a professor emeritus at Harvard and MIT, said, this is computerized vocational education. Ever since vocational schools were founded, Schwartz recalls, administrators repeatedly found that they couldn't keep up with the rapid technical innovations in the business world. Of course, mastery of those innovations constituted these schools' entire reason for being, which is why they have long been regarded as education slums. Now come New Tech and dozens of similar schools, polishing up this routine and selling it as a promising new game. But in some ways, it's actually worse than its predecessor. When New Tech graduates finally get their first jobs, many of the new computer programs then in use or taking shape in the labs where today's students might work will undoubtedly be pretty sophisticated. The most powerful of them will require an understanding of complex math principles, particularly differential equations, which these students did not have the opportunity to learn. So that is an example of some of the irony that I found in these very, very high-tech schools that are supposed to be so hip and so doing such justice to these students for their professional future in a technological age. I want to skip to another chapter. There's I'm going to read two other pieces. One is from a chapter that's on jobs, and the title of this chapter is Limping Toward Tomorrow's Jobs. It is also about our skewed way of, as many of you know, one of the big arguments for why computers should be in schools is, whether you like them or not, you've got to have them for tomorrow's jobs, as we just saw. To test that out, I talked to as many employers as I could find in all kinds of fields, high-tech, low-tech, the works. And what I found was stunning and surprising to me. So here's a brief section, and the section's title of it is Knowledge of the Hands. For some insight into the kinds of jobs we really need, it may help to examine the way seasoned professionals look at workplace competence. Consider this from Chris Meisling, a senior geological research advisor for ExxonMobil. Quote, people who use computers a lot slowly grow rusty in their ability to think, he found. Meisling's group creates charts and maps, some computerized, some not, to plot where to drill for oil. In large one-dimensional analyses, such as sorting volumes of seismic data, the computer saves vast amounts of time, sometimes making previously impossible tasks easy. This, Meisling believes, lures people in his field into using computers as much as possible. But when geologists turn to computers for interpretive projects, he finds they often miss information, and their oversights are magnified by the computer's captivating automatic graphing and design functions. This is why Meisling still works regularly with a pencil and paper, tools that, ironically, he considers more interactive than the computer, because they force him to think implications through. He says, you cannot simultaneously get an overview and detail with a computer. It's linear. It gives you tunnel vision. What computers can do well is what can be calculated over and over. What they can't do is innovation. If you think of some new way to do or look at things and the software can't do it, you're stuck. So a lot of people think, well, I guess it's a dumb idea or it's unnecessary. I heard similar warnings from people in other businesses, including high-tech enterprises. A spokeswoman for Hewlett Packard told me the company rarely hires people who are predominantly computer experts, favoring instead those who have a talent for teamwork and are flexible and innovative. Hewlett Packard has been such a believer in hands-on experience that in 5 years in the mid-1990s, it spent $2.5 million to help 45 school districts build math and science skills the old-fashioned way, with real materials such as dirt, seeds, water, glass vials, and magnets. Much of the same perspective came from several recruiters from film and computer game animation companies. And work by artists who have spent a lot of time on computers. Karen Cellini, the director of human resources for LucasArts Entertainment, George Lucas's interactive games maker, told me that you'll see a stiffness or a flatness, a lack of richness and depth. With traditional art training, she said, you train the eye to pay attention to body movement. You learn attitude, feeling, expression. The ones who are good are those who, as kids, couldn't be without their sketchbooks. The last section I want to read, and then we can open it up and talk more. If you ask me questions that are too hard, I'm going to read more sections, so just be forewarned. This is from a chapter on the imagination, and was probably one of the driving themes for me in this book. It's my observation, and both in the literature and in studying schools, that there's probably nothing more important right now than two things for our youngsters. One is their imagination, and the other is their attention span, and they're intimately linked. And the activities and experiences that exist in the world that foster those things are diminishing gradually, well, not so gradually, steadily. And if you want, a powerful workforce in the future, even in technology, what you want are people who have both of those skills. So this is the chapter is called Bulldozing the Imagination, and this is a section called The Body's Brain. And it follows from a little discussion from a woman, some of you may know her work, Jane Healy. Actually, let me just ask, does anybody here know Jane Healy's work? This will give me an indication of what education freaks we have here. Not too many. What's wrong with you? Why do you know her work?
I've actually read all of her books.
Oh, my.
I do like teach summer computer classes for kids and do workshops with parents, and usually I talk about her work and Marie Wynn's work around television, because it's actually Jane Healy kind of continued all the arguments about TV, but now it's
Computers. Right. Good. Well, Jane's she is symbolic of a lot of child development experts who believe that the most important experience for youngsters, particularly, this is more than high school. This is younger than high school, but in the nursery K through 3rd, 4th, 5th grades, are the experiences that stimulate the 5 senses. Touch, we all know the 5 senses, and that this is what builds the base for later intellectual development. As she puts it in one of her books, visual stimulation is probably, she's an educational psychologist. Visual stimulation is probably not the main access route to non-verbal reasoning. Body movements, the ability to touch, feel, manipulate, and build sensory awareness of relationships in the physical world are its main foundations. The problem, Healy writes, is that in schools, traditionally, the senses have had little status after kindergarten. And this is, I think, one of the reasons that schools have fallen prey to the hype about computers, is that they don't have anything that's terribly great to compare to. You go to an average 3rd, 4th, 5th grade classroom, and it's not like you see really rich things happening in most of them. Plenty of educators share Healy's views. One such school is Cary Academy, a brand new, lavishly funded K-12 private school in North Carolina Research Triangle Park. Cary Academy was started by the president of SAS Institute, one of the giants of the software industry, partly to serve as a test bed for SAS's high-end visions for computing in schools. The Academy has virtually everything a school could wish for: an immaculate country club style campus done in Georgian architecture, computers for every student, small classes. Its student-teacher ratio is a minuscule 8-to-1, varied tactile exercises for the elementary grades, and labs stocked with every piece of science equipment imaginable. Despite all of this, the school's science teacher, Gray Russian, is no cheerleader about computerized approaches to science. Quote, "I'd give up these," pointing to computers, "way before I'd give up the lab," Russian told me. "All these virtual labs, that is garbage, real garbage. The computer is a tool to explain real things students have seen." Russian favors what teachers in his field call wet science, the test tubes and fluids and solid objects that students can handle and push and transform with their own hands. A physicist in Ohio agreed, quote, "My concern is that we are tending to expose students to too many contrived, controlled versions of reality, rather than nature as its raw and tidy self. If our school's curricula included an hour of bird watching, or rocket collecting, or fossil hunting, or astronomical observing for every hour spent in virtual reality, I could be content. But increasingly that seems not to be the case." The subject at issue here is what educators call kinesthetic experience, what youngsters learn through the experience of their own bodies. One of the most focused examinations of this notion is a book called The Hand, written in 1998 by Frank Wilson, a neurologist and the director of a program for performing artists at the University of California School of Medicine in San Francisco. In this exhaustive treatise, Wilson accumulates prodigious amounts of material, part scientific and part anecdotal, in the form of personal profiles of people whose success stems from early experiences with intense tactile work. Other studies seem to confirm Wilson's case. The overall picture suggests that the sensory capacities of the human hand send powerful signals to the brain, helping it learn and develop. While science only partly understands these dynamics, some researchers believe they've seen enough to put the brakes on computing. Quote, "When people are using computers the way they do now, it's all visual, with a little bit of auditory activity," says Susan Lederman, a professor of psychology and computing and information science, and the author of one scientific study on the hand.
Quote, if you use them a lot, you are cutting off the natural kind of interaction with the world that you get with the hand. The hand and eye complement each other. But with the simulated dynamics of computing, she says, there's no forced feedback. You are depriving the system. End quote. The simplest version of these theories was once put to me by a former teacher. It had been some years since this teacher had been in the classroom, but she still remembered the maxim her school had lived by. Quote, the more muscle, the more memory. Why don't I stop there? There are other things we can go into, and I'll read if things come up about them when I entertain questions, and we'll just take it from there. And I'm curious to hear from some of you about what you're doing, and part of the reason I read these sections that I know are sort of some of these aspects are sort of frontal attacks on what Microsoft's doing on this or that is I'm interested to have you disagree or point out a different view or report a different experience or something. Yeah, this young lady.
So what are the primary reasons you think that is happening in the classroom? What are the forces that are behind this technology coming in more ways than harmless or whatever?
Let me answer. My apologies for saying, lady, my eyes are not so good. So I just saw your hair. The question, as I understand, what are the primary causes for the technology coming into the classroom so aggressively and primarily negatively? Is that right? I think it's a combination of forces. I don't really believe that there's. There are some profiles in the book of some really unscrupulous companies. One which I can read you parts of it. I think a fascinating story of a company called. I don't mind naming them. Renaissance Learning, and they make a product called Stellarator Reader. And if any of you've got children in school, shaking his head, if any of you have children in school, chances are half of this room has got kids who are using that product because it's in more than half the nation's public schools. And it's just unproductive, simplistic, expensive, and most important, based on really bogus research. And that they're selling to these poor, unsuspecting administrators. And there's some other firms that, are real hustlers. Chris Whittle's Channel 1 and the Edison projects have not exactly always been straight up either. But by and large, everybody's, honestly trying to do their best. The problem is that you have people from different perspectives coming into a culture of the schools that is kind of easy prey. They don't really have the defense systems that can handle a contractor who has a very, very complicated system that may be expensive and may need a lot of technical support to make it work. The administrators who are in that school, they don't have the money to support it. They don't have the skilled people who can understand what their job is versus the contractor's job, and before you know it, they're into something that they can't sustain, they can't fix, they can't manage. Pretty soon the contractor is setting the rules because he's in a vacuum. The schools can't handle it, so he's handling it. And then pretty soon the teachers are going to the contractor. Well, how do I make this work? Well, if you taught your class this way instead of that way, then it would be simpler for you. And suddenly the contractor is defining how pedagogy is supposed to go in the school. A lot of it, I think, is the culture of the software industry, which is driven by a desire to innovate. All the people who work here are very smart and have a lot of ideas and want to continue to change and grow. And whether a school really needs the new change or not is sort of secondary. If you're into something that's exciting, why not make it? Why not sell it? Keep it going. And it's not because you're trying to do a number on the schools. You're trying to be inventive. One of the things I was discussing with the group that I sat with before is that I think it would be a good thing if the software companies that sold to the schools were more straight up about what the condition was of the new products that you're bringing to the schools, and saying, we got this new thing. It may have a lot of potential here, but the kinks aren't really worked out yet. It's very beta. Don't invest in it heavily, but try it out. Put it in your computer lab. Let your computer geeks mess with it. Let's come back in a year or two and see how it's going. And so much of the dilemma here is that this stuff, over the years, the first chapter in this book traces the history of technology in the schools from the 1900s forward, starting with film strips and radio and teaching machines and TV, and then you get computers from about 1980 or 81 forward, and continually oversold. So much hype. And, you know, I'm sure a salesman figures, you know, if I don't just push this to the max, an administrator who is strapped for cash is never going to invest a dime. But, you know, there's got to be a different way of selling this, because you get a sale, and then you get disappointed people, and then they're angry, and then you've got polarized camps, and it's not a good long-term relationship. There may be some other factors as well, but that's... And the other is that, I'll get to in a second. The other thing is that schools are desperate for quick fixes, whether it be technological or non-technological, and they have been for a long time. And the reason they're desperate is that we continue to underfund schools. So they don't exactly have a rich culture to start with, and I mean rich not just financially, but just, you know, fully developed intellectually, you know, where they are confident about what they're doing, and they can know that what they're doing works, and it may need some improvement, but they can stick with it and continue. They're at a sea, and they're pummeled by the trends out of Congress and from the White House, and, you know, it's new math, it's old math, it's you know, performance, what they call, you know, project-based or performance kinds of tests. I'm not describing this word. Yeah, performance assessments where, you know, you're doing projects and it's more qualitative assessment. No, it's not that. It's got to be standardized tests and, you know, measured, and you know, just go back and forth in this, and because they're always at sea and always a victim of whatever the next politician wants to do to fix education. So
well, your latter point actually answered my question. It wasn't there in fact some blame to be shared that the vacuum was created by the sort of bureaucracy that invites this stuff in? I mean, I don't know anything about education other than as a parent. I'm probably the least education savvy person in the room, but every time I go to my kids' teachers and ask, what about this AR, accelerated reading, and a lot of the other stuff, I say, it doesn't seem like it's really all that great. They say, well, but look at this, we report up these tests and it goes to the district, and look at that, your kid's school does better than any other school in the district. And I say, well, yeah, but my kid, I had higher hopes that he would be at the school that does better. I was hoping my kid would do better. They say, well, we don't get down to that level, right? Our school's doing better. And it's sort of a bureaucracy, and again, I don't even know who to blame, but it sounds like you addressed that point. So can I ask a second question? Yeah. Okay. Did you ever...
Sorry for a second.
Well, it depends on the quality. Did you test the other extreme of your... And maybe it's in your book, I have to read it, but did you test the other extreme of your hypothesis? So if we're sort of putting people in the computer labs, you're not coming out that smart. Have you spent any time with people who are doing the other extreme? Like, I find that I'm very involved with athletics, and I find that people are always shocked when they hear an athlete get on TV and talk during an interview and go, he sounded pretty smart for a football player, you know. For a basketball player, that guy wasn't really that dumb. You know, I'm not that surprised. I do find that the kids that excel in athletics are also very smart. Well, I don't know how they do in the standardized tests. I should probably focus on that. But what's your thoughts on that physical stimulation they get through athletics or other activities?
I'm really glad you asked the question. Yes, I very much tested the other side of the hypothesis. In fact, that's what guided the inquiry. It was an obvious question. I started writing about this subject actually in 1995 when I was working as a reporter and editor for Newsweek. That was the first time I wrote about it. And it seemed to me the operative question right away was, well, you know, if computerized classrooms are no good, what happens to schools that, first of all, are there schools that try to actively move in the different direction or try to be low-tech, and what happens there? And I looked at a number of them, and the ones that I ended up sort of using as kind of a case study were Waldorf schools. I don't know if any of you know them, but they're a fascinating, fascinating school system. They have their weaknesses, but and the final chapter in the book is a profile, a very, very in-depth profile of Waldorf schools. I spent almost a year studying them, and the title of it is called The Human Touch. And they turn out some amazing graduates, amazing. And these kids can think through a problem in 10 different ways, and are. I don't know if many of you know about emotional intelligence. You know that term that Daniel Goleman made popular with his book? Fascinating theory. These kids have got emotional intelligence up the wazoo. I mean, they are really, it's quite something. I'm sorry?
That's where you want it.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that was interesting, in fact, it's funny, that last section that I read about imagination, there was a quote that I was going to read, and I just decided to skip it. Here, I'm just going to read you this paragraph. This is after where the woman says, the more muscle, the more memory. Despite kinesthetic insights of this sort, when the Clinton administration first launched its nationwide scholastic computer campaign, shop classes were one of the curricular areas it suggested schools consider cutting to provide money and empty rooms for computers, all of which may suggest a new role for classroom computers as canaries in the academic mine. When enthusiasm for technology reaches unusually high levels, it may be a sign not of success, but of trouble, a signal that the scholastic program is ailing and that money and attention should be directed elsewhere. As David Elkind of Tufts University, he's a big education leader, as he once told me, you need computers to motivate kids if you have the kind of system that isn't stimulating to begin with. And it was the conversation with Elkind in which he gave me that quote, which occurred in 1996, that we then started talking about Waldorf schools, and I started studying Waldorf schools. And another school that is similar and also is profiled, this book is in 3 sections. The first section is called False Promises. It goes through a number of schools that are making mistakes with computers, like that school in Napa that I read you about, and it has some discussions of other thematic issues. Second section is called Hidden Troubles, and that gets into the investigation of this Stellarator Reader company. And some other, and then there's another chapter about corruption that certain technology industries are bringing into schools, particularly telecommunication firms, and some other things. And the third part is called Smarter Paths, and it is profiles of schools that are really going a different direction. Some of them are very, very low-tech, like Waldorf schools, and some of them just have them in a kind of balance. And one of the schools that I profiled that way, that I just found a fascinating school, is in New York City, called Urban Academy. And it's a school for hard luck kids who've just struggled and failed and had trouble in other schools, and they call it, some of the kids call it their last chance school. And it's run by some old, I don't know if any of you guys know about school reform in New York City, but it is a long and gritty history, and they have really worked through it, because New York City is probably, of all of the big metropolitan areas in the country, New York City has least given up on its public schools. So the result of that is you've got smart, wealthy people who are in there fighting to make their public schools work. Where I come from in San Francisco, we have the exact reverse. We've completely given up on our public schools, and you just can't, you can't get anywhere. But in New York, it's a whole different scene, and you just see some amazing public schools there. I spent months studying schools there. I would have written a book on the whole thing if I had been able to. And at Urban Academy, they've got a computer lab. They teach computer science. They've got this and that, and the kids just take it, and they get a little something out of it, and some of them get into it, some of them don't, and then they have all these other things where they're doing incredibly advanced science and math with very simple stuff. I mean, we got this math teacher who I have a long profile of, who who is kind of like Toshiro Mifune. He's really quiet. He talks about like this. This goes to the board. Now, I'd like you to work out this puzzle. That's the level of energy he brings. You don't hear a word. This class is silent. They are riveted. He creates these intellectual math games that are just compelling to these kids, and they go through them all, and they work in groups. It's just amazing to watch. So, so there's a lot that, I don't know if that goes enough, but buy my book. It'll answer your question even more.
So, speaking of school now, the effect school, I guess, and the sort of education in computers, we had an interesting conversation earlier about use versus understanding, and teaching people to use something versus enabling them to understand that thing. And then, related to the conversation that you had with the geological engineer in the oil and gas industry about how people who use computers too much tend to rely on them too much, and if there isn't a feature for the specific kind of analysis they want to do, then they are unable to, they figure it's not a smart enough analysis to do it, or they're unable to do it. I hear that, I recently read a book called House by Tracy Hitter, Tracy Hitter, Soul of a New Machine. Excellent book, by the way. In it, the contractors said, they don't like to use power nailers, particularly for finish work, because it doesn't, it doesn't fasten quite what they would like. Although they use power nailers. And then I have another book called Modular Post and Beam Construction, where they don't like to use hammers because, it doesn't connect you with the material. So I guess my point is, I think, any tool you can rely on too much, and if you rely on a tool too much and don't think about what you're actually doing, you can run into problems, regardless of whether it's a power nailer or Excel. The other day I was doing analysis with my client's actually sitting in the back of the room, and there was a set of numbers that we needed to generate from an Excel spreadsheet that Excel had no feature for, so we figured out how to do it, and we did it. It's not like Excel was, or understanding how to use Excel was preventing us from being able to do that analysis. So I guess I take a little bit issue with that. I think it has more to do, less to do with computers per se, and more to do with how computer education is presented.
Well, I would agree with you, but I'd ask, how many users of Excel are going to be as sophisticated as you all to realize that Excel's missing something and to create the function yourselves? Very few students and teachers are going to be able to pull that off. But your basic premise is right, and I think that is the point, and that's what I would hope that software firms like yourselves would do, is to couple your enthusiasm with some, if not warnings, some advice on the other side, saying, look, here's how to use it, here's how to misuse it, here's when to use it, here's an example of when not to use it. Here's, the main theme that we talked about in our earlier session is that in general, computer software in general, and this is a generalization, but I say more often, and please disagree with me if you do, is about helping the user do something more quickly, more powerfully, more easily. That's what most computer programs do. In school, much of the time that's not what you want to do. You want to slow the process down. You want to open it up for discussion and reflection, break it into its many parts, let the students see how an idea is constructed, how a thing is constructed, how you make a balloon or a go-kart or a da-da-da-da-da-da. And so you need, this is something you always need to keep in the back of your head as people who work with the software in the schools or sell it, where do we, and then there, of course, there are other things where you want to make things more efficient. One of the things we talked about is that software that goes into school to help with school management, how the teacher collates their grades or the administrators keep record keeping and all that, that's a great thing. That saves time and money in places where we do not need more time spent there. But in a classroom, it's a whole other matter. So if you were mindful of that and included that in your discussions when you went into schools, I think it would be helpful.
So a couple things here, so bear with me. One, I would like you to add to your realm of what technology makes possible. When you think of it in the school's context, add relevant, and I'll get to that kind of at the end of my series of questions. Drilling down into kind of the larger responsibility of software companies in education to provide some pedagogic guidance to their customers as to how to use the software. We've actually gotten a fair amount of pushback from education professionals saying, look, you guys are a software company. What do you know about best pedagogic practices in our area of specialty and expertise? So when we do try and reach out and offer that kind of guidance, we get a lot of pushback, and hey, you guys are out of line. Second thing.
Can I ask you a follow-up to that? Is that across all grade levels, or is that
K-12.
secondary?
K-12 primarily. Yeah.
That surprises me. I would expect the higher level institutions to say that, but not the K through 5 in particular.
Secondly, you mentioned earlier about kind of taking a metered approach to implementing technology solutions in a school, and kind of putting in the lab first and letting the technophobes work with it first. Actually, one of the things that we've found is that when you give technology to technophobes, what you get is
Technophiles, you mean?
What was that?
Technophiles.
Technophiles. What you get is technology that is more about the technology itself than if you offer that tool, the technology tool, to, say, a curriculum administrator or a center of influence in the teaching community. They'll have more of a penchant to turn that into a discussion about how it enables teaching and make it less about the tool for the tool's sake. So I want you to discuss a little bit about why you suggested putting it with the technophiles in the lab. Third, I'd like you to drill down a little bit on Renaissance learning, and specifically...
Are you taking notes so I'll remember these questions?
Very funny. I was surprised to hear your opinions about Renaissance learning, specifically because when we ask teachers why they find Renaissance learning so appealing, they say, it's helping us meet the current educational requirements that are being asked of us. We're being asked to get kids to perform well against standardized exams. Renaissance learning helps our kids perform well against standardized exams. So why the recoil? I'll stop there.
Okay. I think I got your last two, but the first one I forgot. What was the first one?
I'll come back to the relevance of computing in addition to making it faster, making it...
okay. But there was the second one was your lab and the technophiles issue, the Renaissance learning. What was the first one? It was
Pushback from teachers.
Pushback, right.
Pedagogic.
And then the first one was the idea of technology adding relevance.
I mean, I think that those are... First, let me deal with the first two together, because I think they're both good points. I guess my point is, let that be part of the discussion. I mean, to indicate that, to prove that I think you did make a good point, when we were talking about it earlier, I was also saying, listen to teachers. You guys have got to listen to teachers, because no one ever does. And it frustrates them, and that's why things go into classrooms that aren't suited. So I'm arguing with you there, and arguing against myself. But let that be part of the discussion. And I think the problem is that the technology representatives who end up there, it's the old salesman thing. You never say anything about the negative, and it's about this, it can work this, it can work that. One of the things that I was pointing out is that for decades, literally, the kind of discussion about technology in schools has been about selling it on its potential. Okay, we realize some perfect, but it's got great potential for this and got great potential for that. I mean, I've been looking at the literature, and it just is throughout press accounts and studies and everything. And teachers, school people who are really into this are tired of that. And the more into it they are, the more tired of it they are, because they feel burned. And so you can't keep doing that. You've got to, at some point, be realistic and say, hey, at some point, we've got to deliver the beef here. So anyway, it's got to be part of the discussion. And
just a note on that one, I think that's where what hurts Microsoft a lot is that it is a discussion, and that means you need to have a body to have the discussion. And I think a lot of times at Microsoft, our approach is, and I was in marketing, so I know this. I mean, it's one to many. So you write up a direct mail, and you get it out the door, and then you're on to the next. And Microsoft is a company not only in education, but in the commercial business as well. That's a problem for us. We know that. That's where we have bad customer service and bad customer sat.
Right. And I mean, the other dilemma, which we were talking about earlier, is that get a cleaned up beta version out the door and then work out the kinks with the upgrades. And a lot of people have kind of gotten used to it, but no one's terribly happy about it, about having to get used to it. And in schools, it's a much more serious situation than with some consumer who, is savvy and has presumably the money to upgrade and so on. So I don't really know what the solution is there, but I do know that because technology is becoming more and more ubiquitous in the schools, and more schools are getting into it, you're getting more and more people who are watching it closely, savvy about it, expecting it to deliver, do not want to upgrade in 3 or 4 or 5 years without having seen some results from what they did buy the first time. And it's just, it's something that's got to be confronted. Otherwise, we're going to get the pendulum swing. It works, it doesn't, it works, it doesn't,
Can I ask that before you move on?
Okay.
I don't think we've been very honest about total cost.
Right. Oh, yeah.
It's not about the cost of the software. The purchase price is the least of the cost.
Absolutely.
You have several examples in that book that just, I had to stop reading. I was so ashamed. It wasn't Microsoft, particularly the computer industry, about these school districts, because the way they spent all their money on the purchase cost, they have nobody to do support. They've got one undertrained IT guy who sees a school on average of 1 day a month, maybe. What business would we ever assume would be successful if they had that same infrastructure IT support model?
Right.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the first, yeah, exactly. Thanks for bringing that up. I mean, the first chapter is a profile of Harlem schools. You can imagine the situation there. I mean, it's just, there's a whole scene that you see where I followed some technicians in visiting some schools, and there's a whole scene there of these poor technicians getting beat up by the teachers because they haven't seen them in 6 months. It's, and then you see a school in Montgomery County, Maryland, that's one of the model schools and one of the wealthiest, and they're underfunded like crazy. They've got I can't remember the percentage, but it's a fraction of what should exist in any industry system in terms of backup and training and all those kinds of things. Quickly on Renaissance learning. I would say a few things. As far as in helping schools meet these new requirements for reading,
It does. The numbers don't show. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, their numbers, if you look at their numbers honestly, which they don't, I mean, they cook all of their studies. They cook them all. It is really, I spent many months studying their literature. It's the most intensely investigated story in the book. So, they don't. But if you're talking about standardized tests, and if the previous year their schools were, only 30% success on the standardized test, and the next year 60% success, and they trace it to Stellarator Reader, the fact that 60% are now passing it may be true, but that Accelerated Reader did it is not always true.
The confusing correlation with causation.
Exactly. And you ask Terry Paul, who's the guy who runs that company, about it, and he considers himself quite the statistician. He'll run into a whole thing about correlation and causation and how some studies can do it and some don't. And he'll spin a web of deception like you've never run into.
And they're also testing different groups of kids every year.
Right.
So what happens is kids coming out of 3rd grade into 4th grade, the teachers in the 3rd grade have anticipated them doing the test. You can't isolate the Accelerator Reader. The other big problem with Accelerator Reader is it operates like a multiple choice test.
Right.
I have seen kids get 100% scores on the book test who haven't read the book. Because another child told them, number 4 is B.
Yeah.
The kid left the mail in the box.
Yeah.
I mean,
their tests are so simplistic, you wouldn't believe it. And some librarians think it's great because they've got all these kids coming in and checking out books. Reading goes way up. See, it's a program that gives kids points and prizes for doing more reading. So the reading activity goes way up in the schools, and checking out the books in the libraries goes way up, and so everybody gets all excited.
And the Accelerated Reader books, not for all.
That's right, because there's certain Accelerated Reader books. But the librarians who are really savvy see the kinds of choices the students are making and the level of knowledge they have of these books after they've read them, and they are aghast. It's really something. This gentleman here, go ahead. With the fellow behind you.
Well, this is something I've really brought up, and I don't know if even your book really covers it, but, there was this big thing maybe in the late 90s where, the internet is coming, and the internet's going to save us, and the internet is so great, and we're just going to give our kids high-speed access, and once they have high-speed access, everything is going to be great. And I wondered if, that's getting away from this model of contractors, and this is just more wide open and saying, hey, the internet's a great learning tool. I'm wondering whether you've done research on that and whether that bears out if schools are, by getting internet access, if schools are actually able to say, yes, our learning is improved, we're doing this, kids are doing this, they're learning, and is that important for their overall education?
Right. Well, yeah, I did look into that some. Again, it's a little something that's hard to disaggregate because as soon as they're getting the internet, they got other things going. But what I did find is that the approach to research and writing and thinking frequently dumbs down when they get very dependent on the internet. We all know the internet has tremendous resources on it, and also some real junk. And to turn, junior high school kids, let alone even high school kids, loose on that and just say, as long as you've got 6 websites on your school report, you've done your work, or to expect a teacher to evaluate every website on every student's report is totally unrealistic. So, and more, you've got youngsters who think the only kind of research that means anything is internet research. And if they don't find it on the net, it doesn't exist. It's like that mobile oil guy multiplied. I even heard this from professors who work with law students and very intense professions, who really these people don't know how to do research unless it's not on the net. And as that's my thing as research, because I'm a reporter, and of course I use the net, but I couldn't believe the number of times that I found that I was looking at something where the net and Google with all its wonders was so insufficient. But with youngsters coming up through high school now, they don't learn the tools in order to make the judgment that what they found is insufficient.
Can I add something to that?
Just a comment to that is there's a big movement to develop lesson plans that enable students and especially people who work with them to evaluate a website for its content.
Right.
And the frightening thing is how many people actually work with kids don't know how to evaluate a website. And the best example, and you should all try this when you get back to your computers, is go to Google and punch in a Northwest tree octopus. There is a website called the Northwest Tree Octopus. It shows an octopus in a tree. Okay? It has research articles. It has links. It has the habits of the Northwest Tree Octopus. It has its major predators, house cats and Bigfoot. All this information is buried within the text website. It has a symbol. You can make donations. You can buy pins. You can buy bumper stickers. I sent that link to 15 teachers and told them that I was taking a bunch of kids up to the peninsula to see the migration of the tree octopus. I want to go. 8 of them sent me lists of students they wanted to take. So there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Let me get some other people who haven't asked. Yep.
I'm a vendor that has a company that specializes in marketing technology in the education business. So I've worked with many companies, Microsoft for a long time. There's good and bad out there. But what I would be curious about is to hear if you found any best practice examples, because I certainly have. I've found cases that they're used in an unusual way, like peer editing, where kids in K-12 are opening up a Blackboard classroom and commenting on each other's work using that software, and getting comments from kids who wouldn't normally participate in another fashion. But I'm curious if you found best practices, particularly tied to any of these educational theories.
Yes, I did. And, I think I'm glad you asked that question. Despite all these decades that we've been doing this, the computers in schools are still new enough where we haven't yet developed a culture where something average, a student or a teacher can be doing something with a computer in the classroom that's fairly average, and somebody can automatically say, it's not good. You're going to have to do better than that. We know how to do that when when a kid draws a drawing of something or does a normal science report and so on. We don't know how to do that with technology. If the kid used it and got something great, look what you did. So this kind of thing is exactly the way that people need to be thinking. More specifically, my sort of simple construct for this is that in the younger grades, or very young, nursery school, so on, kindergarten, up through third or fourth, the negative consequences or the negative ways of using the computer so heavily outweigh the positive ways, and they're so intricately tied together that you're really better off, if you want to play it safe, of just keeping them out of the younger grades. And I really think you would all do yourselves a great service if you broadcast that message that we really don't think it's worth it until kids are in fourth or fifth grade. The basic sort of, I think, operating principle for using computers or any tool is a tool is appropriate to be used by somebody when they are old enough to understand what it is and what they're doing. You don't give an axe to a 5-year-old, and you don't let a 10-year-old drive a car for a reason. And the same with media. This is the whole debate about television. Television and commercials are appropriate when you can sit down with them and say, hey, look, that's a commercial. What do you think that is? What's the message of that commercial? And, when you can have a discussion and the person you're talking about it with can understand what your discussion is, that's when they're old enough to do this thing. So the same with the internet and so on. A 6 or 7-year-old shouldn't be set loose on the internet. A 12-year-old, I don't know, that's judgment, and then you get so on and so on. So that, I mean, I'm getting. Anyway, I've got three ideas here, but so yeah, that's my point about youngsters. I really think it would be better if you just kept them out of there and just pushed keeping them out of there until they're fourth, fifth, sixth grade, and they can start doing some internet research that's supervised. The other good practice is there's a computer program that used to be, I think it's still around, run by Tom Snyder Productions. It's called the One Computer Classroom. It's very interesting. It was just, the idea is that a teacher, there's one computer in the classroom that the teacher controls, and then a fairly sophisticated multimedia blah 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 runs that's on a complex subject, may it be history or science, whatever, and the teacher sort of guides this discussion with this computer program. And it works really well. In fact, it works so well that when I went and visited one high-tech school where they had the standard thing going, and they had a network breakdown, and I watched these classes, and they were meh. And then they had a network breakdown, and the only computer that worked was the teacher's. So the teacher had to wing it, and, without even knowing what she was doing, she did this one computer classroom. And it was great. The students had a blast. The discussion was better. They got further. They saw more things. They thought of more things. It was, so that it can be a good thing. And then beyond that, I think the other obvious thing, and this is where I think you all could do a lot, is as you get up into the high school years or junior high, there ought to be a shop class, essentially, that's a computer science class. Learning how computer technology works from the guts out should be part of any high school curriculum. You shouldn't be able to graduate from high school if you don't know something about the fundamentals of digital technology and how a circuit board works and all that kind of thing. And that should be 101. And the other thing, there are some interesting programs, and this I'd be curious of whether Microsoft's working on anything this way. I gather from my discussion previously that you're more platform people and not product people, but there's a really interesting program that's being built by a company called Carnegie Learning, and it's called Cognitive Tutor. I don't know if any of you are aware of it, but it's quite interesting. And these are guys who come from I guess it's Carnegie Mellon. Maybe I think it's Carnegie Mellon. And they've been doing studies on this for like 15 years or more, and really, really put it through its paces. And they figured out a way to basically create an interactive, interactive in a simple way, not like with multimedia bells and whistles, program where if a student is working on some science issue or math or something, the program constantly asks the student questions about how they're figuring out the problem, and they can actually trace a pathway for how the student solves a problem. And talk about, this thing I was saying, that you don't want to you only want to simplify in certain circumstances, and in other circumstances you want to actually open up and complicate. This is a program that does that stops and opens up and complicates, presents a very complex picture of how a student is thinking and solving an issue. And even in this program, as intense and robust as it is in its possibilities, the people who designed it realize, and they're old teachers, it's still not good enough to really have a large presence in the classroom. They've structured it in such a way that only 40% of their time is on this program. The other 60% is in interacting with the teacher, asking questions and this and that, and having all this discussion. So it's really a very controlled, intelligent system. And they've done some robust studies that, as opposed to the Renaissance learning studies, seem to indicate it's really got some power. One more quick question. Somebody who hasn't asked a question. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm wondering, it's sort of talking about technology in a very broad way, but if you sort of narrow it down and say calculators in math classes, did that inhibit learning or help learning?
The literature says no. But in general, no. And the calculator issue is a great little, this whole story in microcosm. And the fact that you've got, and I saw it, 3rd, 4th, 5th graders using calculators for math is insane. And this is when you start, it's like learning a language. That's when you learn, get the multiplication tables and everything in your blood. And these kids don't, and the result is, I talk to a lot of contractors and people in all sorts of professions. They get people on the job site who can't even estimate. You can't look at something, well, that piece of lumber I think will fit over there, and they're like way off. You've got people making mistakes on drafting and just simple things that they're not used to seeing, because the youngsters are coming up without being able to do the most elementary math.
I'm sorry, I taught for 28 years before coming here, and a lot of the stuff resonates. And I totally agree. Elementary school, keep them out of there. Give them crayons, give them paper, chalk. That's where it's at. Calculators, math analysis level, high school level, where you're really working on the abstract level, are incredibly efficient. And you get kids actually thinking about, what does this graph really mean? It just shifts them from doing calculations to just rote work, where their errors mask the problem to where they're really effective. But
that's like exploratory stats.
Oh yeah. I mean, you just really, But that's at that level.
Again, I can apply the technology where appropriate.
Right. And the thing is, you hear over and over again a lot of educators saying just that. We're not into it as a panacea. We're appropriate. We're not appropriate. But their standard for what's appropriate and inappropriate is not terribly rigorous. It bleeds. It tends to grow. It's like a cancer. So you gotta really be strict.
Frankly, the age of the teachers.
Yes.
I mean, we keep saying keep the computers out of the elementary schools. Well, the elementary schools is where you've got a lot of old teachers that don't know how to use computers to begin with. So, like you said earlier, when the kid draws a picture, you can evaluate a picture because the teacher had to draw a picture when they were in school, so they can say yes, that's a good picture or not. Right. But and actually, I'm going to sneak this one in. So, did you find that was one of the issues, was the experience that the teachers had with the technology, and therefore not being able to evaluate good work versus bad work, the website versus bad website? How much of the problem is there?
And the teacher's lack of experience with technology?
Right.
That's some of it, but also a lot of it, and this is important. A lot of teachers, they're just not technologically oriented people. They're in there because they know how to interact with students, and it gets in their way in a very deep way. They're not like you guys. They don't. It just doesn't work for them. So they can't solve the most simple problems. They make a mess of it. They can't get it done. It rattles them. A student comes with a simple question. They can't deal with it. You've all dealt with people who are not very technically savvy. A lot of teachers are like that, so it doesn't matter if they've had a lot of experience. Some, of course, grok to it very nicely, but...
But I guess my point is that an age issue?
It's partly an age issue. It is partly an age issue, but it's not wholly an age issue. I think we need to do some book signing.
Yes, so if you guys, we've got some books over here if you'd like to purchase them.
We can talk some more if you want to.
Yeah, Todd will be around if you'd like to chat.
And the book, if you're on your way or something, the book has a website, flickeringmind.net, flickeringmind.net, and there's an email there to email me if you want to, and just say that you heard me here, so I'll know who it is, and I'll try to answer.